Okay, I think we're ready to begin. It seems like most people are here. So, before we get started, just to make sure everybody's aware, if anybody has any questions for me at any stage during this presentation, then feel free to ask a question via the questions box. I'll answer some of those as we go, and then there's a bit of time set aside at the end of this as well to answer anything that's still unanswered by that point. So I think we're ready to get started. So, what we're going to be talking about today is how Google Analytics can be used with your student recruitment campaigns. So we're going to have a bit of a look into what the tool can do for recruitment marketers, how it can be made to work with your existing digital marketing efforts for promoting student recruitment, as well as discuss some of the common issues and common strategies around using analytics in a more useful way to have a positive impact on your student recruitment. So I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Lucian. I work as a web analyst at NetNatives within NetNatives Analytics, Insights and Research division. So day to day I work with Google Analytics as well as some of the related tools like Tag Manager and such on a day-to-day basis. So student recruitment campaigns are kind of bread and butter to what we do within our team, as well as using analytics to work with them. So hopefully everybody will find this content useful. I'm going to begin just by having a little bit of a talk, just in case anybody's not aware of who we are, what we do. So we describe ourselves at NetNatives as an education specialist digital marketing agency. Just go over a few of the bullet points. We work with over 200 universities in the UK and around the world. We specialise very much in outcome-focused digital advertising. So one of the key parts of the way we work, and something that we really believe in, is making sure that everything that we advertise is always focused on producing an outcome for those that we're working with. So be that student recruitment, be that getting engagement with a website, whatever it is, there's always something in mind where we're trying to show the returns on what we do and show what the results are, really. So we also work on a couple of other areas as well. So we provide, within the team that I work in, web analytics, data insights and market research specific to the sector. So some of the people attending might be familiar with some of the work we've done with National Clearing Survey. We also run the European MBA survey as well as another example of research that we've done within the sector. And in addition to that, we also offer compelling and bespoke creative marketing as well. So we're really a full-service marketing agency, I suppose, is the lingo for that. And really, as I mentioned already, what we do is all focused around working with our partner institutions to encourage quality inquiries and get applications via primarily digital channels. So that's us and that's me. That's what we do. But what we're going to be talking about today is specifically Google Analytics and how that can work with your digital marketing campaigns. So obviously everybody here, I'm sure, is aware of what analytics is, what Google Analytics is. It's really become a totally dominant tool within the sector. You'll find very few education sites that don't have analytics set up in some form or another. But really, I think a challenge that a lot of marketers face is really making that not just report, some basic stats about how their site's doing, but actually making that talk to their digital marketing campaigns, making that work with their existing strategy for getting students and through digital channels. And that's really what we're going to be covering today. So in today's webinar, we're going to be covering, number one, a few little checks to carry out to make sure that you can trust the data you're getting, to make sure that it's accurate, to make sure you can rely on it before you start thinking about whether you can use it to look at your campaigns. Secondly, we're going to have a look at what the current method is for tagging your campaigns so that you can get visibility on the traffic you're bringing into your website via your digital marketing channels. Now that could be email, that could be social media, it could be digital advertising, so on and so on. But we're going to look at how you can tag that up so you can see exactly what's come from each channel within your analytics account. Next, we're going to move on to looking at some of the relevant reporting metrics and just some of the common methods that I recommend using if you're analysing a particular campaign. So I'm going to go through some of the default reports available in Analytics and just cover a couple of methods that you can use for your own site to start getting an insight into how your campaigns are performing and what sort of response you're getting from them. Next up, we're going to have a bit of discussion around what it means to be outcome focused. So this is where we'll look away from looking at the basic stats in terms of the users you're getting via your campaigns and thinking more about what is it that you should be measuring as an institution that really corresponds to marketing success. And I'm going to detail a couple of methods that you can use to do that. Then finally, we're going to have a quick look at the most cutting edge part of the analytics stack, which is Google Data Studio, which is going to be, in my opinion, the most exciting part of what we're going to cover. So we'll have a bit of a look at what that tool is, why we think it's important, and what role we think it's going to play in doing analytics in the future. So to start with, can you trust your analytics data? So in theory, analytics is a tool that's very simple to deploy on a website. You'll see in the documentation when you create your account that all you got to do is take a little piece of code, a little tag, and then add it to each page of your site. Now, in theory, that is the case. In theory, that's true. But in practice, there's a few things that can affect the quality of your data and can make it a bit more complicated than that to get data that's actually reliable. So I noted down in these slides just a few of the common issues that you can encounter. So let's have a look here. You'll immediately notice we got an example of the Google Analytics tracking code on this slide. If anybody's not particularly familiar with code, then don't worry. This isn't something that you have to be a web developer to understand. What I wanted to point out here is that if you see in this example, we have a code that is placed too far down the source code if we look at the line numbers on the left-hand side of this screenshot. So this is one of the common problems we see with analytics accounts, whereby the tracking code loads too late, basically. So every time a user views a page on your website, if it's too far down in the source code, if there's too much that's got to load before this script can execute, then you run the risk of losing data. You run the risk that the user will leave the page, they will click through onto a second page before that code has actually had a chance to run. And that can be a bit troublesome, of course, because that means that you've got a user who's maybe clicked through from an ad campaign, but their visit's not recorded. They're not. You're not able to see that they've actually even reached the site at all. Another common issue, which we see with multiple sites, and this is quite a sector-specific problem, is when you have user journeys, so typical visits to the site, that span multiple web domains. So I've got an example in this screenshot where we have our fictional university or college, which is webinar.ac.uk, whereby the user lands, they begin their journey to the site on www.webinar.ac.uk, and then at some stage in their visit, they click through to a subdomain, so courses.webinar.ac.uk. Now, something you won't see in the Google Analytics advertising brochure is that analytics usually depends on you having one web domain on your site. There's one or two little extra things you have to pay attention to if you want to make this work when you're tracking across multiple domains and still be able to see the results of campaigns. If anybody's sort of unsure exactly what this means, then I'm going to have a detail an offer that we have available at the moment where we can run what are called Google Analytics health checks. So I'll talk through that in a second. So if anybody's unsure, unconfident about the quality of their data, then there's an option for you to get in touch and have a look at that. Third common problem is when you have an analytics account where there's a prominent amount of spam in the data you're collecting. So on the screenshot on the left here, you can see a couple of examples of analytics spam. So these usually come from either botnets or rogue advertisers who are using basically illegitimate means to send data into your analytics account that is not real data. It's not actually data coming from somebody visiting your site. Now, the reason why spam can cause trouble is because if you run a report that says, for example, this is how many people visited our site, or this is how many people visited section A of our site, or whatever. If you're comparing that against the total volume of visits, and that total volume is inflated by spam, which looks like real people but actually isn't, then your stats can get a bit out of whack. They can, you can basically skew the averages. It can make it seem like you're doing worse than you really are because some of your data is not actual real data. So preventing spam is important for that reason. Final common problem that I wanted to highlight is when you have an account where most of your pages on the site feature an analytics tag. So in this example, we have a user journey where somebody lands on study/PG and the tag fires. They click through to this funding page and the tag fires. They click through to bursaries and the tag fires. But then there's a page that's part of that user journey where the tag, for whatever reason, is not working. Maybe the tracking code is missing, or there's something that's preventing that from running. And that's interrupting the process of tags firing on every page from when they land at this top page here to when they convert, to when they submit their inquiry. Now, the reason why this is a real problem is that if you want to relate anything that happens after they view a page where the tag fails to work to what campaign they arrived through, that's not going to work. Because if you have any page as part of that user journey that's missing the code, the session's cut in two. Analytics no longer knows that it's the same person who had this whole user journey on your site. So you actually lose the ability to attribute the entirety of their session to whatever the traffic source was. Now, obviously, if we're analysing campaigns, we really need to know everything that the user does on the site after they reach it via our campaign. So this is a really important issue to make sure is not happening. So just to review the key points about whether or not you can trust your data. Number one, your data is only reliable if you're taking care to keep your codes correct. Make sure they're deployed according to the most up-to-date instructions. Make sure they're not missing from any pages, as well as taking precautions to protect against spam. Second key point, these are simple measures. It's not something complicated that you have to do to make this correct. They're quite small, fairly easy steps you can take, such as setting up filters, such as auditing your most important parts of the site to make sure that the codes are correct. And they're fairly quick to implement to make sure that your data is good. So although data quality issues are fairly common in the sector, luckily they're fairly easy to deal with as well. Now, if anybody's concerned about data quality, then you'll hopefully have seen in your follow-up email to signing up for this, and if not, then we'll be sending a link out in a follow-up, which is to come soon. We're offering free Google Analytics health checks to any participant in this webinar. So what we will do as a part of that is check for the issues that I've just detailed, as well as a few others as well, to make sure that your data is good quality, make sure that it's reliable, and just suggesting ways that you might want to work to make that data more reliable, more accurate. So yeah, if anybody has any concerns about their data quality, feel free to get in touch with us and we'll see what we can do to help. So actually, let's just check if we've had any questions so far. Doesn't look as though anybody's asked a question so far, so I'll take that as a positive. If anybody has anything they're unsure about, as I say, feel free to ask a question via the sidebar. So what we're going to move on to now is how you can tag your advertising campaigns so that you can get visibility on them in analytics. So here's a typical example of what we're trying to achieve here. Let me just zoom out a little bit. So you've got digital campaigns running across the web. They usually, almost always, will revolve around quite a simple idea, which is the idea that you capture interest from people somewhere on the web. You know, it could be in an email, could be on social media, could be on an advertising platform, whatever. The idea is always to get interest from people, prompt them to click on your ad, and then they'll reach your site, some landing page on your website. So written up an example of that here. We have our institution, webinar.ac.uk, and a page on there called Study Here, which is our landing page, which we've built to encourage people who are new to the site to make an application, to find out more about what we offer and hopefully become a student in the long run. Now, you could be doing advertising in digital channels, as we've shown here. You could be sending out emails to particular prospects. You could be running activity on social media. Anything where you're doing digital marketing, anything that's a campaign that's intended to get students, usually has the same goal. It's get people to view the landing page, and then after they view the landing page, get them to find something out or submit an inquiry or whatever. So there's a tool called the Campaign URL Builder, which I've linked here. The easiest way to find it is to just do a Google search for Campaign URL Builder. It should be the first result. Now, what this tool lets you do is it lets you tag up your campaigns that you're running on any digital channel using a technology called UTM. So these are called UTM tags. Don't ask me what it stands for, because even Google doesn't always know. You'll find multiple articles on Google that give you a different definition for what that actually stands for. But the important thing is this is a tool that you can use that will help you set up links that you can put across different types of media to tell analytics who's clicked through from which type of campaign. So I'm going to go through a typical example of how you might do that on this demo. So this is the Campaign URL Builder. And let's pretend we have our landing page, which we identified in here. So webinar.ac.uk/study here. So I'm going to type the URL in here, https www.webinar.ac.uk/study here. So what we do is we take our URL, we type that into the box up here, and then we're just going to tag what the traffic source is for this version of the ad. So, for example, if we're doing advertising on Facebook, the source is going to be Facebook. And then the medium is going to be, usually we use medium to say what sort of ad was the user looking at when they saw this link. So, for example, if this is a Facebook Canvas ad, so that's a popular ad format that we see on Facebook, you might type in Canvas. Or if there's another type of ad that you're using, you might use something different. Or alternatively, you could just put social, just to designate that this is a social media advertisement. A couple of other examples of what you might enter in here. If this is for an email campaign, usually you do something like newsletter as the source and then email as the medium. Or maybe if this is going out to maybe people who've already inquired, you might call it inquired users or something like that. Really, this is just about setting up your own way of designating which traffic is which. So for a particular campaign, how do you want it to appear when the user clicks through and when they view your site? Finally, the campaign name is usually, you'd enter in here what you want the campaign to be referred to as. So for example, if this is a campaign where we are, let's use this example. So it's emails going out to people who've maybe already made an inquiry. We might call that email marketing inquired users or something like that. Really, you can type whatever you want to into these fields. There's not particularly strict rules behind what you add in here. It's more, the question is, does it make sense to you? Is this telling you something useful about the ad? Now, this won't affect what the user actually sees when they reach the landing page, but what it will do is it will tell analytics, Google Analytics, that they came via this source, they came via this medium, they came via this campaign, whenever they click the version of the link that you generate through this tool. That's how this works. So just scrolling down, you'll notice that now that we've filled in these fields, we see this version of the link that's been generated for us, where you can see that there's been these little extra tags added on. This is called a query string, if anybody's unfamiliar with what that means. And this is basically a version of our landing URL which contains a bit of metadata to tell analytics what campaign the users click through. So if we're running campaigns across multiple channels, if we're doing kind of multi-channel activity, what we would do is we generate a different version of this URL for all of the different channels, all of the different networks that we're advertising on, all of the different social media channels we're using will each have their own version of this with different parameters in here. And that's how it works. One cool feature of this tool is that it allows you to generate what's called a short link. So this is basically a URL shortener. So we click this link, and that will generate for us a shortened version of that URL. Now, the reason why this is really handy is a lot of people will be a little bit put off by a URL that looks long, has a lot of parameters in, whereas something that's short, that's snappy, people will be, in general, far more receptive to that. So that's why it can be handy to use a shortened version. So the way we'd actually set this up is now when we build our campaign in whatever email platform we're using, rather than pasting a link directly to our site, we would paste this link instead, so that everybody who comes via the campaign has that extra metadata added that says this user's come through this traffic source. So just to recap the key points about this, UTM tags are extra parameters that you can add on via the campaign URL builder that will add metadata onto a link without affecting what they actually see when they get to the page. These tags tell Google Analytics that the users come via a campaign, and they tell them what the campaign was, what the traffic source was, and what media the campaign was sent on. And then one final point is just to be aware that there are some scenarios where you have to take a bit more care with this. For example, if you have a page that ends in a file extension, so your URL ends in .aspx or .html or something like that, you have to omit the ending / before you add your campaign parameters on. Another example is if you have a site that uses redirects, you have to make sure that you're using the destination URL in this as the actual destination of that redirect, rather than passing it through a redirect, because basically that can sometimes strip off parameters. So just a few scenarios where you have to take care. This isn't something that will work 100% of the time, or rather, well, it will work for 100% of the time if it works for the particular page in question, but there are some pages where you can occasionally run into a bit of trouble with this. So my recommendation on this side would be just to make sure that you're testing the links that you're actually sending out to people before you publish your campaign. So, moving on, what metrics in analytics are relevant to reporting campaign results? So I'm going to just go out into Google Analytics and we're going to have a look at some live data for a real site. Now, obviously, because I can't share real data for any of the campaigns that we're working on, I've got the next best thing. So we're going to be working in the Google demo account. So if anybody wants to get access to this, there's a little tab in Analytics called Discover, in which you'll find a link where you can get access to this data too. Where this data comes from is basically Google's own merchandise store. So they made this data public for anybody who wants to basically experiment with a correctly configured analytics account. Now, the cool thing about this is we know the data is reliable, we know it's set up to collect accurate data, so it's a good way of just demoing using particular parts of analytics. Obviously, this is an e-commerce website, not an education site, but the concept of analysing how well a campaign is doing are pretty much the same, so it's still relevant. So, the first thing I want to detail is the crucial thing, which is once you've added tags, UTM parameters, to a particular campaign, how can you then see how that campaign has performed? Well, the easiest way is to go into this section called Acquisition, and then there's a section within there called Campaigns, and then All Campaigns. So this report will tell you, over whatever date range you have selected, all of the different campaigns that have driven users to your site. So, for example, we see this data share promo in here. I don't know what this campaign was, but you can see how each different version of each different campaign, that sent users to the site has its own row in this report. So this is where, for all of the different campaigns your institution is running, you'll see a row for each of those, and we can compare a few stats. So, what I would recommend doing first of all is, if you have different campaigns and you want to compare which ones got the most actual visits to the site, drew the most users in, then the first 3 columns in this report are the best place to start. So, analysing the number of unique users who've come via the campaign, the number of new users, which is a good measure of how many people came via your campaign that had never been to your site before. So that's worth looking at if you're more sort of interested in getting earlier sort of people in the funnel, rather than those who are maybe already familiar with the site. Sessions is the total number of visits to the site. So this is important because if somebody comes back to your site via typing the URL directly or by using a bookmark, then that will be contained within this column. So this is where you can establish how often people are coming back after the initial time they visited your site through the campaign. Finally, the bounce rate is also worth knowing. So what this is telling you is the likelihood that somebody who came via your campaign left the site immediately after they clicked through. So it basically means how many people didn't even bother to look at a second page after they hit the landing page. So a higher value for the bounce rate means that you've got a campaign where potentially the landing page is not showing people what they expected to see, wasn't what they were looking for. Whereas a lower bounce rate suggests that people are more likely to explore the site in more detail after they come via your campaign. So that's a good measure of whether the landing page is relevant to people, whether you're bringing in users who really do want to see content on your site. Beyond those statistics, I would be skeptical about using most other stats. For example, session duration, the way that analytics calculates it is a little bit flaky. It's sometimes not worth looking at. I would usually stick with these 4 stats if you're purely looking at how our campaign is doing in general. That's not including conversion tracking, which I'm going to come on to in the next section of this. So we'll talk about that in a second. So there's another report in here called the Source Medium Report, which I just wanted to highlight as well. This will show you how you're doing based on the source and the medium that you entered. So just going back to the URL builder, the source and the medium as we see them in the rows in here, so like Google Organic, Google CPC, so on and so on, those correspond to what was entered as the campaign source and the campaign medium when you built your URLs for your campaign. So what you can do is, if we were analyzing this campaign and we wanted to find anybody who's come via, our inquired users email campaign, all we'd have to do is search for inquired users email as we entered it in when we built our campaign. It's as simple as that. That's all you got to do to find how those users are doing on the site. So that's kind of half the battle, is understanding what volume of users you brought in and whether they reacted positively to your site or negatively for each campaign. But there's also a second thing you can do with these parameters, whereby we actually report sort of supporting information about the campaign. Now, there's a tool in analytics called segmentation, which I just wanted to detail because this is a really important aspect of understanding not necessarily how many people came via a campaign, but what they did on your site, who they are, as well as a bit more supporting information like whether they're browsing on desktop or mobile, because this can really inform how you plan your campaigns in the future. If it turns out that everybody who's clicking through from your emails is browsing on mobile or is browsing, is coming from a particular country or is from a certain demographic or whatever, that information is really useful for understanding what profile of people you're bringing in. So I'm going to detail now just one method that you can use to do that. So you'll notice I've reached this interface by clicking where it says All Users at the top of a report. So I'm going to click into All Users. And there's an option here called Plus New Segment. So I'm going to click on that. That will pull up this interface here where we are prompted to choose, first of all, we're prompted to give our segment a name. So I'm going to call it, I don't know, let's call it something like Recruitment Campaign, just to make a fictional campaign name in here. I'm then going to go to Traffic Sources on here, and you'll notice we have the option to either filter users or filter sessions. Now, the distinction between these two options is that if we filter sessions, we're going to be looking at just what happened immediately after the user clicked through from our campaign. Whereas if we decide to filter users, then we're going to be looking at not just what happened after a user immediately clicked through from our campaign, but also what they'd done before on our site and what they did after. So it's almost like the user's full history of every visit they've had, not just what they did immediately after the campaign. So which one of these options you choose will depend on what information you're looking for. Usually I would filter based on sessions if I'm just analysing the response to a particular campaign. After that, all you've got to do is just paste in the name of your campaign. So that's going to be whatever you entered as your campaign name. So we just copy that, paste that in here. Now what's going to happen immediately is on the right hand panel here, you'll see a little summary of how many sessions and users your campaign generated. Now obviously because this is a fictional campaign name, I've just made it up, we're seeing 0% in here. But if this was a real campaign, you get an overview here on how many users clicked through via your advertising campaign, whatever it was. Now, all you've got to do once you've entered this in is just hit save, and then once you save your campaign, that means that whatever report you run in analytics will be run only on those users that came via the campaign that you specified. So for example, we could go into the mobile overview report, and then that would report for us data from whether people who came through our campaign were predominantly using mobile versus predominantly using desktop. So that's really important to understand, whether they're viewing the mobile version or the desktop version of our site. If you have a campaign where the users are almost all coming via mobile, you really need to focus on making sure that your site is, well, your landing page in particular, is mobile optimized, is giving them the content they need to see. Conversely, if users are mostly coming via desktop, you need to make sure that you're providing them with enough information. These are people who are maybe going to be more invested, willing to spend more time on the site, they're in less of a hurry. So it's important that they're given, enough information, more information potentially than those on mobile would want to see. Just a few other reports that you might want to run once your segment is set up. The geolocation report. This will tell you what locations those users are in. Another good one is new versus returning. So that will tell you how many users who came via your campaign came back versus how many only came once. As well as another really important one, which is the site content. That's in the behavior section. All pages report. So this one will tell you what pages did people actually look at after they came from our campaign. So this is really handy if you have content on your site like application information, information about how to make an application, information about funding, about accommodation. These are the kind of pages that if somebody's viewing them, you've got a slightly hotter lead. So it's really important to be able to analyze not just how many people came via your campaign, but also what they looked at, whether they are consuming the content you expect them to consume. So just going back to our slides, really, I think what sums it up is that there's no single stat that will tell you everything you need to know about how well your campaign is done. But the good news is there's a wealth of tools available in analytics for really exploring the results from your campaign, what the response was, what sort of user is reaching our site. And that way you can really gain a better understanding of how your campaigns are doing, what sort of users they're bringing in, and so on and so on. Got a question from Lorraine, who says she's lost audio. Apologies for that, Lorraine. It seems to be working okay on my side, so maybe check your equipment. Lorraine says it's back. Good news. Thanks, Lorraine. We got a question from Lisa as well. He says, would you always choose session over users for campaign analysis, or vice versa, or both? That's a great question. Really, it depends what question I'm answering. It depends what I've been asked. If somebody is asking me what results did we bring in via this campaign, I would probably use sessions. If we're looking purely at how many users came in via the campaign, did they bounce, did they not, what pages did they view, I would usually stick with sessions. When I would use users would be if I'm more interested in the longer term. So, if somebody's saying, in general, what do the people who came via this campaign look like? Also, if I'm performing analysis over a longer time, so if I'm looking at, 2 months down the line after we first ran the campaign, did any of them come back? That's when I would use users, because that's what will include everything they did after they initially looked at our campaign. So it depends on the question, it depends on the timescale, really. There's no one answer, but usually I'd use sessions. If you kind of want to know, if you're not sure, then probably use session would be what I recommend, unless it's way after the campaign is finished. So that's all great, but none of that will tell you whether you succeeded or failed in your campaign. None of that will tell you whether the results were good or whether they were bad. To do that, you need to take a more outcome-focused approach. So again, I've got some bad news and some good news. The bad news is, by default, analytics won't tell you what your results were. It won't tell you how many inquiries you got from your campaign. It won't tell you by default how many enrollments you got, and it won't tell you, whether people did activities that really tie closely with your marketing efforts. The good news is you can customize it to do exactly that if you take a bit of effort to do so. So what this is really all about is making sure that whenever you run a campaign, you have a particular outcome in mind, or a particular set of outcomes, ideally. So just to go back to the campaigns report in the demo account, we can see what their strategy is for their site, because it's something we can really learn a bit from. So let's just wait for this to load. So here we have 5 goals which this specific site has identified are important to consider. What was a successful visit to the site? So we're talking about visits where people made a purchase, visits where people were more engaged, so they viewed a particular number of pages, visits where people registered for an account, people entered the checkout, as well as SMART goals, which we won't go into in this session. So you'll notice that what they've clearly done, the people who are in charge of this site, is they've said, why are we bringing people to this site? What is the result that we want to generate from all of these effort we're putting into getting campaigns live? So I would recommend that every marketer working on an education site starts thinking about, it's great if somebody clicks on our campaign and reaches our site, but what constitutes a successful visit? And then once you've done that, it's fairly simple to configure Google Analytics to track those using what's called conversions, also known as goals. So I've drawn up in my slides here just a quick example of how your institution might start thinking about outcomes. So it really starts with thinking about what are the objectives for your site. So, for a education site, that might be to inform prospects about what your offering is, encourage them to apply. Capturing data, so getting people's email addresses, getting their contact details so that you can engage in further marketing communication with them. Encouraging people to visit your campus might be another one. If open days are a particularly important part of getting students for your institution, that might be something else that you measure as an outcome from your site. Once you've thought about the objectives, what your site's trying to achieve, then you can break that down into measurable outcomes. So, informing people about your offering might break down into getting people to spend time on your course pages, as well as viewing particular key pages like application or funding information. Those are the kind of actions that really correlate well with somebody who's likely to make an application, so they're worth measuring. For capturing data, it's going to be leads generated. How many inquiry form submissions did we get from this campaign? How many people took the time to give us their email address and agreed that we can send them further communications? If you're encouraging visits to your campus, how many open days did people sign up for? How many of those did we generate via this activity that we're running? Now once you've got this set up, this ties in really well with what we were talking about earlier with regards to setting up UTM parameters, because in your report, which shows you all of your campaigns, you have an instant look at each of your goals and how many of those you generated via each campaign. So this column here, this goal completions column, is the most vital stat in the whole of Google Analytics that tells you how well did we do for this campaign. Once you've got your conversions set up, and once you're confident that they're recording correct, reliable information, then this is really going to be your go-to stat to measure how well did this campaign do versus that campaign. Also want to point out the column to the left of this one as well, which is goal conversion rate. So the goal conversion rate tells you how likely was a single person who came via this campaign to fill out this goal. So a higher conversion rate means that a greater proportion of the users who came via a campaign ended up converting, ended up becoming, doing whatever action it is that you've set aside. So, what proportion of them filled out an open day form, what proportion of them viewed an application or funding page, and so on and so on. So really, it's all about saying what are the outcomes, make sure you're measuring them accurately, and then make sure that you have that set up as a goal so you can attribute that goal. If anybody watching this is unsure about how they can do that on a technical level, so if they're maybe not sure how they can collect that kind of data, I'd encourage you to look into a tool called Google Tag Manager. So we're not going to be discussing that on this webinar. Maybe that's one for the future. But Tag Manager is the tool to use to make sure you're collecting accurate data. So anybody who wants to get more involved in collecting more relevant data, maybe you're not currently measuring open day signups in analytics and you really want to be, Tag Manager is a good tool to look into to do that. So I recommend everybody checks that one out. Finally, once you've done this and once you're confident that you're collecting accurate data, that's when you want to start thinking about implementing some kind of reporting structure. Now, Data Studio is a very new tool by Google, which some of you may have heard of. I expect more of you haven't, or at least haven't used it yet. But really, what Data Studio allows you to do, and I'm going to go into one of the templates here. So I'm at datastudio.google.com, and I'm going to go into this template just to demonstrate how this tool works. What this allows you to do is to take data out of your analytics account and then build it into live reports, which connect live to your analytics database and really present that data in a more user-friendly form. Now it looks like it's being a little bit slow right now. Let me try refreshing this just so we can see, just so we can get this to load up. I think while we're waiting for that to refresh, let's see if we have any other questions. So yeah, question from Stephen. He mentions, what's non-idle time? Yeah, great question. And he says, and how do you measure it? Yeah, so I mentioned Google Tag Manager. So Tag Manager allows you to take a bit more control over how over what you're sending into analytics in terms of what data. Non-idle time basically means how long were people spending on pages, moving the cursor, clicking on items, watching multimedia content, engaging with tools. Basically, how long do they spend not silent, not doing nothing? How do you measure it? I'd recommend looking into Tag Manager to do that. So there's a few recipes out there you can find that will show you how you can do that with Tag Manager. It's really all about setting up Tag Manager to collect that data, sending it into analytics, and then that's there in your database to report. So Tag Manager is the tool I recommend looking into to do that. Question from Richard. He says, "Oh, will we be sending recording of the webinar out to attendees?" Yes, we will. So we'll be sending a link out to that in the follow-up to this. So yeah, if anybody attending has missed out on parts of this, then yeah, we'll be sending out a full recording after this. So it looks as though this report has finished loading. So this is a really basic example of what you can do in Data Studio, but what I think everybody can appreciate from seeing this template is that compared to analytics itself, this is something that's far more user-friendly. We're explaining in words what each of these stats mean. And it's really all about presenting a kind of an environment that shows all of the stats that are most crucial to your site. Now, this particular report, as you can see, is entirely focused around visits to the site. So this isn't particularly campaign-focused. But what's cool about Data Studio is that it's completely customizable. So you can use this tool to make a report which shows just data from your campaigns or from a specific campaign. And it really allows you just to take control over exactly what you're showing in your report without having to resort to something like an Excel spreadsheet or something that's difficult to work with and difficult to share. The other cool thing about Data Studio is that once you've built a template once, it's connecting live to your data. So you make it once and then it will always be there, it will always work. And you can even actually share them with anybody, even if they don't necessarily use analytics or understand it or even have access to it. You can still create one of these and share it with those people, as long as you give them the right level of access to do so. If anybody's familiar with Google Docs, Google Drive, then the way that these dashboards, these reports are shared works exactly the same as that. So it's basically you generate a sharing link that will allow someone either to view the document or edit it, and then it's just a case of them bookmarking that link. So it's all accessed via one easy link. The reason why this tool is really handy for analysing campaigns is that quite often one of the common challenges in reporting campaign results is not actually getting at that data, but then putting that data in the hands of other people, making it understandable, making it visual. Where Data Studio is really powerful is that it enables an analyst who's collecting the data, who's able to get that data themselves, it enables them to really put it in everybody else's hands, present it to people maybe more senior than them, in a format where they can easily understand it and easily digest it. It's a tool that's going to evolve a lot, to be honest, over the next year or so. Still in beta currently, but it's evolving more and more every day. And a lot of analysts are kind of thinking that eventually this tool will replace potentially the custom reporting and dashboarding interface in analytics. So it's good to get on get ahead of the curve on that front and have a look at this. Anybody can access this tool for free who has access to an analytics account, so I recommend everybody check out Data Studio. Well worth a look. Cool. So that takes us to the end of our slides. I want to say thanks to everybody for listening. Hopefully the content we've gone through will be useful to everybody. Just to recap the main points, the process I recommend everybody follows is to start with looking at UTMs, looking at this campaign URL builder. That's really going to be the first step for everybody who's new to this. So make sure that you're tagging your campaigns using this tool. Make sure that you're able to visualize all of your campaigns. Make sure that you have visibility of those in your analytics account. Once you're confident in the quality of that data, that's when you can start pulling some of the supporting data around who's coming through from your campaign. Is the bounce rate high? Is it low? And then segmentation to start having a look at, what countries are they in, what devices are they browsing on. Once you're then confident in doing that, then start thinking about conversion. So start mapping out your objectives, making sure you're collecting relevant data. Look into Tag Manager if you haven't already. That is the tool that you can use to make sure you're collecting accurate conversion stats. And then really, once you're confident in your ability to use those stats in terms of looking at conversions, looking at conversion rates, that's when you can start thinking about building a regular reporting structure. If anybody's particularly confused or particularly uncertain about doing any of this stuff, do get in touch with us. So we're going to be sending out a follow-up form after this webinar to all attendees. And if anybody wants to get in touch just with any questions or concerns or anything like that, then please do, and we'd be happy to talk about how NetNatives can help you out. So we've got a bit of time left for open questions. Let's see if we've had any others. Doesn't look like anybody else has asked any questions since the last few we answered. If anybody has anything else they'd like to ask, in that case, then do get in touch. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to be sending out a little sign-up form if anybody's interested in an analytics health check as well, just to make sure their data quality is good. Yeah, in the meantime, good luck to everybody who's going to be using this tool, and hopefully you'll have a lot of success. So I think that takes us to the end. We've gone through all of our questions, so I think time to say good night. And yeah, thanks for attending. Look forward to hearing from you soon. Cheers.